Now coming to tonight's session, please allow me to welcome Radhika Kesavan, the moderator of this session. Radhika is currently the product manager at Cynomedia, giving paid TV experiences to worldwide operators like Tata Sky in India and Astro in Malaysia. She has donned a diverse set of roles over the years and have led and transformed more than 10 teams in taking a leap into several new product initiatives. She believes in the cause of building a bright future for her children. Radhika is a proud alumni of the Institute, pursuing the EMBA program in product leadership. Great to have you here with us, Radhika. Handing the session over to you now.
Thank you, Shama. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a nice evening. It's a rainy evening in Bangalore. Good to see you all at this time, even in this cold weather. Data and analytics have become one of the most commonly used words in the past decade. As they are interrelated, it becomes essential for us to know what is the relation between them and how they are evolving and reshaping our businesses. But did you know that the interesting thing about data science is that the fundamental role of the job existed much before the term itself was coined? It dates back to 1962 when researchers and statisticians had initial discussions about this field. 1962, you heard me right. So here to discuss about the evolution of data science, why it took so long to come to the limelight, and how it can be powerful in making hardcore business decisions is our speaker today, Matangi Sri. As product leaders, this is a subject that we are all deeply interested because, let's face it, converting a business problem into a data science problem is not an easy task. Our speaker, Matangi Sri, started her journey in data science 17 plus years ago, much before most of us even became interested in this field. She has built data science teams across large organizations like Citibank, HSBC, GE, and tech startups like 24/7 AI and PhonePe. She has overall 20 patent grants in the area of intuitive customer experience and user profile. Through these patents, she actually pivoted the products for these organizations into a new and exciting path. She's currently heading the data organization for GoFood, Gojek. So you can expect major impactful innovations in your hunger journey, as she is optimizing the time taken from the moment you feel hungry to the time the order is delivered. And yes, through data science. She has recently published a book, Practical Natural Language Processing with Python. She's an active contributor in the data science community through lectures, talks, blogs, and also advisory role. She's a guest faculty in many premium academic institutes across the country like IIIT Sri City, IIM Kashipur, NIT Trichy. She is recognized as one of the phenomenal She by Indian National Bar Association in 2019, as a top 50 influential AI leader in India by Analytics India magazine in 2021, as a top AI leader in India by 3AI Association in 2021. I invite you to immerse yourself in this journey driven by Matangi Sri. Over to you, Matangi.
Thanks, Radhika, for the kind introduction. Thanks, Shama, to have me on this. So I'll give a brief intro on what the topic is going to be today, and then we go ahead with the poll before we proceed further. I'll start sharing my screen. So today's topic is going to be, we're going to analyze, is AI a myth or reality? More so that I'm putting this statement forward is, I've heard many organizations, many founders, and some of the VCs, do not know which direction to take on AI, right? How much to believe this, how much to stay away, how much to believe this and put everything out, and how much to stay away from this and play cautious, right? And hence, we're going to a little bit analyze and talk about this, talk about some of the reasons, why some people are a little unsure about the success of the field, where it has impacted, and if you are thinking of running an AI organization or creating or converting some of your solutions into AI, possibly some notes you can take from this talk. This is my objective. So before we proceed further, we'll start with a poll on how many of you think AI is a myth and how many is a reality. How do I see that? The poll results will happen after this, right? Shama?
We'll give them like 10 seconds to take the
Yeah,
poll,
sure.
and after that, I'll share the results.
Sure.
I think we have the results here, Matangi. So if you can see, we have 91% calling it reality and about 9% still saying it's a myth.
Okay. Nice to know the 91% says that it is it's a reality. So that's a glad thing, and 9% is a myth. Okay, so we will talk further, and then towards the end, I hope we convert some of the 9% and not any of the 91%. Okay, so we get going. So I see data-driven decisions into two phases. The phase one was more data-backed. This was your classic statisticians kind of roles that people were playing. So most likely these are like things like, hey, I think, we tested a campaign, we put a marketing campaign out there. Is the marketing campaign result statistically significant? Or let us say we want to understand what are some of the key drivers of sales in an area. There are some level of, ANOVA test or some level of, causal analysis, etc., being done, and some attribution being done. So this was that stage of data back. I would, if I have to put a date, I would say pre-2010, pre-2012. Predominantly, a lot of companies were operating in this mode. They had, statisticians, they had, core analysts, etc., in the company. But primarily, the hypothesis was driven by business or driven by people who own that initiative, and data was used more to validate or not validate it, or to ask a little bit of causal questions, whether what is causing this dip to what is not causing this dip. There is some level of attribution done to what data could do and not could do, but overall it's not a very clean attribution that people couldn't put a number on the the data itself, right? So they could, if somebody asked them how successful is your data organization, there wasn't a clear answer. And even to the question of how much business impact will data drive was also questioned at this point in time, right? I'll give you another anecdotal example here. Like I said, this was fairly the early 2000s, etc. So if I were interviewing for a job, one of the things that people will describe as my job description is, hey, we have a lot of data in our BI in our warehouse or in our BI systems, etc. We want somebody to look at that and make sense out of it. We don't know what to do with it. So this was how the job description sounded those days. Today's data science job descriptions are fairly more detailed than that. People say we have to drive X amount of business impacts. It's not uncommon to see data scientists co-owning OKRs in many companies, etc. Right, so that's the data-backed phase that we spoke in detail about. Then this phase is about data-led, right? What I would like to call this as data. This is the data-backed phase. Sorry, I forgot to switch the slide. This is exhibits the phenomenon or not, why, recommendations and not predictions, and some level of experimentations. Think about your clinical trials, your classic marketing campaigns, maybe at some level of risk scoring, if not done by large-scale machine learning model, but more done with statistical models, very static, decisions, and a lot of these decisions had to be also well supported by intuition, right? So, for instance, you cannot have a risk score model in which the income is not rank ordering by, the risk is not rank ordering by income, for instance. So even if the data says otherwise or the model says otherwise, there was a tendency to tweak the model to suit the narrative that we believe in, right? And hence a lot of the static was helpful but not very attributable success. From here, we move to data-led and human-governed phase. What changed, right? So this is the time, roughly to take it between 2005 2010 kind of thing. Some of these internet companies. I'm sorry, we just lost power here. Am I audible?
Yes, Matangi, we can hear you.
Yeah, please don't mind. I think the power will come back. Data-led and human-governed is the phase we are going through in this. What happened was between 2005 to 2010, some of these pre-existing internet companies started expanding. There was a lot of data that got collected. Data started being primarily changed. Then what happened was there was also a rapid rapid progress, so to say, in infrastructure, which changed. So, and then the sciences came together, right? But the fundamental two things that happened was a large collection of data being available to take algorithmic decisions. Use cases became available, and infrastructure, right? These two kind of things came into picture. The sciences was very algorithmic, which was there from a long time. In fact, even the deep learning models, etc., we see mentions of this in 1980s itself, right? So the sciences and the algorithms were sitting somewhere. Companies weren't paying much attention to it because neither did they have large scale data, not the infrastructure to crunch the data. So the coming together of the three, with adequate use cases, so to say, started making decisions data led. So we do see the incidence of micro decisions, making be it your recommendation engine and things like that, which was more data led. So nobody is writing hypothesis, for instance, saying that people watch certain heroes movies better than the others, and then someone is writing a rule on it, right? It became it kind of the hypothesis itself got generated by data and then learned by data, tweaked by data, etc. A major shift from the previous phase which we saw, which is human beings were writing the rules and data was validating. Even in cases like classic risk underwriting, etc., that is how it happened. Today's risk models in a lot of forward-looking companies, the patterns, the features, etc., these are multitudes of features, maybe hundreds, 500 kind of features, where the model is making a decision on which feature to take and which are not to take. A big deviation from where even the model had to support your intuition kind of thing. Most of these models are non-linear. You can't very easily understand what's going on behind it, etc. So we have come with a shift. The initial forerunners were the internet companies, and then the traditional companies like banks and retail, etc., started following this. So as soon as, however, let's again talk about the initial 2000s, right? So what happened was, in this phase, there was a lot of buzz. So algorithms were used. So Netflix announced this challenge. There's a lot of buzz, and some of these, algorithm-based internet companies like Google, etc. There was suddenly a lot of buzz and created by media, and some of the cases were successful as well. Now this got a lot of a lot of folks into the game without proper understanding of what this field was, right? So from here, what happened was, I would like to take an example of Gartner's hype cycle here, which is, as the immediate technology triggered, got in a lot of interest, and it inflated expectations, right? People thought a bot could do everything. People thought everyone is going to lose job. Now AI is going to take over jobs. People thought, a bunch of departments is going to go away from the company, etc. And then there was also not well supported, investments into AI. People invested in infrastructure. People invested in large data science teams without understanding what they are signing up for. Possibly a lot of a lot of people from fresh from academia also came in. There was a lot of experiments done. But because of the hype, because of not being ready to get into the field, there was this peak of inflated expectations that happened, and then suddenly everything dropped, and then there was this whole talk about whether AI is real, or maybe this is all very science fiction based. Maybe this is going to take a long time for us to take it to reality, and complete a lot of people, it attracted a lot of attention of people who thought this was nothing, right? It was just a hype. Now I see into a stage of productivity and a little bit after the slope of enlightenment that you see here, where organizations are fairly careful in their investment in AI. They know to some level on how to expect the impact. There are leaders in the data science field who have seen the ups and downs of this field. Some people from my generation would have also seen how the initial data backed kind of phase worked, where we were more careful while applying models. We were checking more for robustness, etc. So there is a lot of realization today that it's a field that you use it with proper expectations. You follow proper project life cycle, set the requirements well, understand what is the business impact, etc. So that kind of made this field into a much more stable at this point in time than what we saw as an initial trigger of hype and then extreme suspicion. Why did the initial wave fail is what we are going to see quite a bit in the rest of the presentation. Before that, we want to ask the audience to kind of share their view on why do you think the initial wave failed? Some of you may have witnessed it. I don't know, some of you were possibly are very young today, may not have witnessed the initial wave fail, but any guesses on, even if it is not initial wave fail, why does AI fail? You can type your answers in the chat.
Audience, encouraging you all to type your answers in the chat window so we can see.
Probably the processing power is also something that has evolved in the last few years.
True. That is also a reason, sure. But let's assume that the infrastructure is not a problem. Even then, AI solutions, have failed, right? We have got two answers. One is infrastructure from Radhika, and one is people do not trust AI.
Okay, there is also a question, why do we think it's a failure at all? It was a failure.
Yeah, so I just wanted to understand from audience their experience of, or their perception of, why did it fail? Cool. If there are no questions or no comments, we will see some answers. Okay, why did the initial wave fail, right? And
we have two answers there in the chat window. One is from Vandana saying people do not trust AI, and the second is from Basim saying maybe because of capabilities.
Yeah. So okay, so we will see some key reasons of why it failed and cover some of these points as well in the process. One thing I would like to highlight as we go through the reasons of why it failed is that it's important to understand the reason. Even now, there are a lot of projects in AI which fail. Sometimes it's not like nothing should fail, right? It's a little bit of research area as well, and it is good to expect some amount of failures. But understanding why did the initial wave fail, will help us kind of avoid those mistakes as we get more deeper into this journey. So one was a blind adoption, right? Applying AI on anything and everything. I'll give a classic example on this. Let's say in the field of marketing, you have a certain budget constraint, and then you want to target people, for an offer, for subscribing to your product or downloading your app or, making a transaction in the app, so on and so forth, right? But if there is, for example, a company is in a growth phase and, it has a monthly target to meet, and they have budget to burn for the first 2-3 months. They want to make sure the product adoption is good and worry less about budget as a problem, at this point. Then you don't need AI for this. But I've seen places where people build a complete targeting model, with a lot of variables and things like that, and then realize that, okay, there is no constraint, right? There is, and measure the model on how much revenue you got, right? If there is no constraint, there is no problem. So the thumb rule I want to suggest here is you can't apply AI on anything and everything. There has to be a use case with some constraint, with something. Maybe there is a trade-off that you are looking at. Maybe there is a time-money trade-off that you are looking at. Maybe there is a cost-quality trade-off that you are looking at. There should be some trade-off, that you have, or you have a set budget. Some constraint is required for you to apply the problem. Unconstrained problem do not require sophisticated solutions. Another example I could give is, for instance, there is a lot of buzz on personalization. And if there are only 5 products in the company, what will you personalize, right? Only if there is enough choices, only if you are restricted by a real estate space in which you can show only 3 choices out of 5 choices. Let's say out of 50 choices, you have to pick 3, then there is a problem. If there are only 5 choices, then you're better off showing everything and getting the maximum out of it. So the first thing you may want to ask yourself is there a problem that the machine has to solve? Or if it's not, then it's not worth applying an AI solution there. This is the other problem. Let us assume there is a constraint and everything, and then people build a deep learning neural network model with a bunch of layers, and apply the state-of-the-art hyperparameter tuning and so on and so forth. And they talk a lot about all of this. They're true to their words. They have really built a model, but then nobody is testing on the complexity. There has to be complexity to a value trade-off. It is very difficult to derive it. However, at least there should be a baseline model, right? So, for example, if there are, let's say, 50 choices out there, and then you are predicting 1 out of 50 for the user. Let's assume a simple recommendation system where the company wants to recommend the best product for the user. They try to personalize it, and hence they are going to pick up the top 1 or top 3 products out of 50. Right now, this model, which is supposed to be super duper good and extremely complex algorithm and all that, should at least be better than randomly picking 1 out of 50, right? So if the click-through rate when you pick up randomly 1 out of 50 is 7%, and if the model is giving 6.5%, then what's the point in deploying them? So it's important that it may be complex, it might take a lot of features, but if it may be missing essential things. So one of the things I always insist data scientists do is, whenever they say my model is good, I have built a model and have used these state-of-the-art algorithms, etc., my first question is, what's the baseline, right? So what is the current system doing? What is your naive, absolutely naive logic? Maybe frequency distribution based logic, maybe some basic if then else condition that is out there. What is that doing? And what is your model doing? Offline, can we challenge result A versus result B before we put all the deployment resources on production and do an A/B experiment? Can you offline prove your naive logic, your model is better than the naive logic? And so, as it may sound so simple, one, it gets missed in a lot of cases where people directly hit production after building a model, not testing things on offline. B, even in production, people generally don't do an A/B testing on figuring out, what the naive logic is doing, right? And it's a common miss that people do, and it costs a lot of time and a lot of money to even realize, you are not better off than what you wear. Some of the fraud rules, for example, right? Maybe there is a very simple fraud rule out there. The model is trying to replicate it because possibly of the data bias and the way it is collected, etc. It can be any reason. I'm not blaming the ML models here. I'm not saying that they can't beat a naive logic. They should beat the naive logic is my point. And hence, if it is seemingly a simple rule is doing better than your model, then something is off there. Either data preparation, either the way problem is solved, solution, either the way we think about how should this be evaluated. Possibly we talked about in the previous slide on no constraints, no AI solution. So maybe the constraint is not clear, and that's why your naive logic is kind of beating the model well. So ask yourself, is the complexity worth it, right? And ask that before you do any productionization of the model. The other side of the story is tweaking it too much, right? And I want to mention this famous quote from Jim Barksdale, and if I'm not wrong, he was the founder of Netscape. So if we have data, let's look at the data. If we all have opinions, let's go with mine. So making it too much into tweaking it, right? I have worked with stakeholders where they go to the other extreme of the black box, which is like they say that, okay, this variable is not making a lot of sense to me. Can we change this variable? Can we drop this variable? This variable is not, again, making lot of sense to me. Can we take off this? Can we see a relation between the X and Y variable? And I don't think, it is following a monotonic pattern, and hence maybe we should not have it, right? From this extreme to that extreme is also wrong. These machine learning models, ideally, you should build only if there is nonlinearity, there is complexity, there is data and decisions to be taken at scale. Then only you build these machine learning models, and which fundamentally in itself means that it is a little bit beyond human comprehension. So, and if data is saying something and the models are explaining to a greater level, some of these, maybe we can address some of these as part of model governance process, etc. But again, tweaking it too much and kind of completely simplifying the model to a bunch of if then else rules is also not advisable. Delivery versus research. There is always this was one of the initial things, right? The initial data science teams that got built had a lot of people, rightfully so, from research organizations coming in. And what happened was these projects took immensely long time to deliver. And in a fast evolving business where you're left, right, center pivoting things, and you are chasing growth numbers, you're chasing some insane KRs to be met in a very short time, having the first cut robust solution and doing a deep research before even coming up with a solution is also something that initially people did. So they kind of I do see some of these organizations also doing keeping the data science team with inside a golden cage, right? So that these are hardcore researchers who will come quite a long, who will take a long time to deliver something, and you are okay with that. Now, what happens is by the time they deliver, the relevance of the problem itself is gone, because these are fast-paced tech companies where they're having this large-scale data in the first place, and data changes, consumer behavior changes, product changes, and your relevance is lost, right? And then again, you start on a new project. So there has to be the right balance between, you have to build robust models, no doubt about it, but it's also, you will have to balance it out with the pace of delivery, right? If the pace of delivery is too huge, right, too long, then the problem and the relevance may be lost. But at the same time, it is not to say that everything is is 3-4 rules, or everything is is kind of bucketed, and then we start we make everything too simple, right? It's not about making it too simple, but at the same time, balancing the pace between how robust your model is to how fast you need to deliver. Maybe one way to do this, for instance, is depending on the stage of the organization. You even while bringing in a team, while recruiting folks, you understand and empathize with the stage of the organization, right? If it's a startup starting out, an algorithm is very core to their success, you do get something out to get started with, and then you build, so to say your A team to keep developing more robust solutions out there, right? And keep doing the research, and you build a research team which is fundamentally focused on long-term success of the product, and there is a quick-paced and agile data science team, which is kind of putting out your first cut solutions out there. So it also depends on stage of the organization. If it is a mature organization, already you have seen the best lift out from the data science. Now you want to move from let us say X% to 10% more than the X%, and you are hitting a wall, which happens after your first 3-4 optimized data science models. You need to now get to hardcore research, and that time you can't build a research team. So having that balance, maybe having few people dedicated to fast-paced deliveries, to few people at the right time being built for long-term research, depending on, of course, how strategic that algorithm will be for the product, how much IP you want to create out of that solution, also pays off. But understanding and arriving at the right balance sits at the heart of a good data science team. Another thing, people have tried and experimented, a lot of different org structures. Interestingly, one is completely isolated golden cage teams, I would like to call them, where data science is kind of treated with a few meter long pole, and they are working on something of interest, and then the products work on their own, and maybe for specific projects they get on, and product has a different understanding about data science has a different understanding about product, right? Complete silos, does not have enough information to be transferred. But at the same time, the reverse of it is teams that are too much centered around each other, that data science is changing their getting ad hoc requests and almost becoming like a team that manages a bunch of rules and dashboards and things like that, right? So to have that adequate organization structure, for example, a pod in which there is good data science leadership plus people know how to work with each other, their boundaries are clear, and in transfer of information between, I have got product, but it can be any stakeholder, business teams, product teams, or engineering teams, or strategy teams, etc., where you meet at a certain cadence, or where does each other's boundary lie, and you don't simplify your solution too much, but at the same time you're not working this inside an ivory tower, right? So that is also could be another reason. This, for instance, I have spent my first initial years in banking, where model governance is a big deal, right? So if you build a model for a month, a model to get approved may take 2 months, right? It is to get any model out of the out into the production system is a big deal, because they go through every detail of the model. How many features? Why do you need so many features? How robust are these features? Distribution before, distribution after, etc. On the other side of the spectrum, I've seen tech organizations where it's free, right? Like somebody builds a model and they put it out without a peer check, or without looking at enough process and checklists if the model has followed, without looking at out of sample validation results, for instance, without doing offline tests enough. Like anything that has a QA, like engineering has a QA, models need a governance. Not engineering governance to model. What I mean is robustness of the model. How does it evolve to changing user behavior? How does it evolve with, how is it robust if few variables tomorrow for some data pipeline issues get missed off? Is it overfitting? Are there extreme nonlinear relations that is out there, and maybe that should be realized? Are there leakage variables in the models? Are there variables that is used in training data but is actually not available in test data set, right? So on and so forth. I can list a bunch of checklist items, but those kind of get missed out in the initial phase, and resulting in a poor model governance. Hence, you do not know, you do not get what you see, right? Forget the model predicting an output. We are not able to predict how well the model will do, right? So hence, having the right governance people, having the right governance council, having the right pair of eyes to check a model built by a few people, establishing some solid validation practices, etc., would make a big difference to the success of data science and AI subsequently in the organization. Always target the low-hanging fruits. So what are some of ways that we could we could make this better, right? So rather than going after huge problems and solving them as the first cut solution, maybe a better way to begin an AI organization, or if you're trying to set up a data science team, or trying to get the best out of your data science team, maybe you start with your low-hanging fruit. It's not to say they're just is restricted only to the low-hanging fruits, but we will see some of the low-hanging fruits that you could get kickstart your AI journey in your organization. So anything that fits in this paradigm, what I like to call it as collect, learn, predict, train, score, basically, will work well if provided your constraints are clear. You collect data, you learn from the data, you classify, you produce a probability score, or you get a forecasting value, etc. That's your, and multi-feature, multiple rows, which humans cannot do very well with few rules. There, the that could be a good starting point. Things, classic ones, credit scoring models, campaigns, targeting with a constraint, fraud systems, forecasting. These are proven to be AI systems have done very well than human judgment or human underwriting, for instance, in case of credit scoring model, or writing some rules for campaign targeting. Similar for fraud systems, AI systems have done fairly well. Fraud systems, I would put the terms and conditions there. How well you instrument your data, how well your ground truth data is available is very important. And forecasting also, large scale forecasting at multiple levels. For example, in an e-commerce company, forecasting at multiple SKU level, or forecasting with the different changing environment, etc. AI systems have done well. And for each of this, it is always good to put a baseline and then see whether the models are doing better than the baseline. I would call this at scale micro decisions. For instance, there are plenty of choices. You have plenty of products. You have millions of products. You want to show top 6 out of it. Even if you have thousands of products categories, you want to show the top 6 categories. These will be extremely right tail distribution. So generally, a frequency distribution kind of naive logic will not work. If you only show what the user has seen in the past, the user is not discovering anything, and hence it may not add business value. So these kind of cases, AI will work better than, for example, your human decision or your naive logic or your expert systems. Expert systems, bunch of rules put by expert. Again, routing allocation happens at scale. There are multiple drivers, multiple customers, multiple locations. How do you assign which driver to the which customer? The naive logic in this is allocate the closest driver to the closest customer. But again, close itself is distance-wise close or time-wise close, etc. Right? So these kind of situations also, because the data we know for a long historic period, we know supply-demand ratios. Long term, we know forecasted output. We have seen models doing better. So large number of decisions within a very short time, maybe in microseconds or in seconds. A lot of choices to choose from. Dynamically evolving user behavior. This is classic use cases, given the amount of advancement in computer vision, for instance. A lot of these techniques, you can't do it in any other way other than applying AI here, and proven without doubt. Upcoming, I wouldn't say it's mature, your chatbots and voice bots kind of use cases, where you want to move into natural language kind of way of reading users, not the templated options that we generally get to click. This is a journey. Understanding natural language, unfortunately, is not so easy, because This itself comes in various shapes and forms. People mix between different languages, and grammar is not always right. We are not native English speakers, for instance. Some of these are, bots and language models trained with a certain audience in mind, and hence it's an evolving thing. But it is certainly, out there as a low-hanging fruit. Maybe you may have to, when it comes to bots, maybe you may have to pick and choose your natural language use cases for that. Not very complex queries, but simple queries like, when is my order getting delivered, when is my whether I will get a return on the product, etc. Could be use cases for voice and chat bots. Fundamentally, anywhere you can save human effort and improve improve human accuracy also. The one I would little bit stay away from is insights with care. Of course, insight is important, but you may get a lot of insight just with exploratory analysis and understanding the domain better. But if you want to apply any of the machine learning models here, just make sure your attribution is clear. You are able to explain causality with a lot of confidence. Use variables with care, and again, whatever you recommend, the organization might use it, but attribution may not be very straightforward. So I would like to conclude this is like this: is AI a myth or reality? I think 3 things lie at answering this. Large amount of data, good enough problems. We saw some of the low-hanging fruits. Large amount of data, well-described problems, and a good organization climate, which is willing to invest in data-driven decisions, would result in business impact. So that's all I had for today. I would like to redo the poll that we began. I don't know if it's a
Absolutely. Let's do that. I'm relaunching the poll. Okay, we still have one person who is still convinced that it's a myth.
Okay.
Okay, but yeah, out of 9, I think most of them are convinced. This is the results. I hope you all can see it on your screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to understand that one person's perspective.
Yeah, if the one person wants to come forward and clarify with you live, just go ahead. And that's a quick mention to all the audience and attendees here. If you want to come forward and ask a question live to Matsangi, please go ahead. This is your chance, and get your questions clarified. Meanwhile, Radhika, please go ahead and start the Q&A part of it.
Yeah, sure. So, Matsangi, I think what I really understood, my key takeaways were we moved from a number crunching era into a data science era, probably much faster than other industries. Like aviation took probably 25 years or 65 years from its first flight to landing on the moon, right? Music went from vinyl to disc, probably took about I'm thinking about 30 years, but data science overtook statistics in less than a decade. That is the kind of journey that I heard in your discussion, and that's very interesting to see. And probably the failures, the key points why it could have failed is probably because there was no problem worth solving earlier, and the number of because maybe the number of choices that are available were limited, and the idea of doing a POC, proof of concept first, and seeing whether the pilot is successful was probably not there. I think all of those contributed in not making it so successful in the early days.
Yeah, well captured, Radhika. I would agree. There was this new thing, and people all wanted to jump onto it without taking enough caution. I could put all my reasons in that one bucket. So a right organization structure also improve, as well as a good understanding of what a model can do and what it cannot do, and a tendency to, a temptation to not make it too complex without benefit for that complexity.
Right. So we have one question from Mario. I think the question is slightly incomplete, but let me take a stab at that. How about product managers managing AI ML product? I think it's more about understanding probably words of wisdoms from you for a product manager to manage an AI ML product.
Fair question. Yeah, and my answer to that would be, fundamentally, if you can establish boundaries well between what kind of engagement you're going to have with the data science team. If you can contribute to some of the metrics that the model should be capable of driving, and drive the engagement more on metrics and what it should deliver and what it should go out and what you will get, and on experimentation, if you can focus on that, that would be a great start for a product managing AI ML product, working with the data scientist. As much as it would help complexity, but if you can focus energy on establishing contracts and metrics, that would be a great start.
Okay.
Radhika, there are a few comments in the chat section, if you can see.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing attention to that, Shama. So I think another question is, will AutoML take away the data scientist jobs in the future? From Amir Deshmukh.
Yeah, so this is a common question, and that's what people thought when AI came, that it will take away everybody's job, right? Yeah, so it's a good science fiction, but it's not ML is a funnel, right? If I were to describe the funnel, at the top of the funnel is how you shape your solution that gives you the maximum impact, right? The next level is what kind of dependent and independent variables you choose, that kind of makes the next level impact. Next comes features, then comes your algorithms, and then your hyperparameter tuning, right? So AutoML kind of plays a role in the last two buckets of it. Okay, so you already built a model, a first cut model, which is giving AUC of let us say 70, and then maybe from 70 it could move to 72 or 73, right? But the first cut 70, a lot of this work is done through features, is done through thinking through data. It is done intuitively understanding the landscape of what the business problem is, setting up your business solutions. Trust me, it's a journey of where 60% or 40% to 60% of the time you spend just shaping the problem, the first round of the problem. Then the subsequent versions will take lesser problem shaping, but even then we are never finished attributing the model, so to say. There is one lens we view the model, and in another lens it fails. So you figure out how to set this up well. So AutoML is not going to do all of this, right? It is possibly doing what somebody is writing in Python in a loop. Some of this are taking, but to get to that step is a lot of step before, and that's where a lot of data scientist time is spent on.
So it will remain as a science fiction in the near future, at least.
Yeah, it's not. That's a lot of this is a lot of thinking, problem solving, and everything. So that requires, that's where data science, the scientists spend the maximum time. Not tweaking. Yeah, even if you are going to use AutoML for all of that, that's fine.
Right.
It's not going to make a difference, right? AutoML may get adopted, but data scientist jobs will remain the way it is.
Right. So, Matangi, I have another question. What are your, let's say, top 3 predictions for the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, I am not at that level of expertise to answer that, but I will give my opinion on it. One is, I'm thinking a lot of this will become from prediction to generation, right? Today, a bunch of these models are prediction. Like, given a set of choices, which is the choice that will be more suited to the user. But we are not generating choices itself, right? We are not generating content. We are not. There are here and there proofs of what generation algorithms can do, but it's not large scale adopted. It's not. We are still talking about personalization from a perspective of existing personalization more today is picking up the right choice for you given millions of choices. But the generation of choice, generation of music for you, for example, depending on your music taste and not somebody has not composed and I'm throwing a music at you from out of the choices available, but actually the computer generating the music and that being adopted. It's just a very marginal example of the bigger change that I'm saying, where choices itself will get generated, not just for example, let's say more practical example could be fashion tech could get into a point where they are actually putting together based on your purchases and based on your preferences a dress that you would like, and it's not even a dress that some designer has done it or it's already in the stock or something like that. So yeah, so that's the that is one trend I can think of. Second, I'm thinking more and more AI governance will come in. That itself is not defined yet. When we talk about governance, we are a lot talking about data governance today, right? We are talking about what data companies should collect and what data they should use and things like that. But what is like, for example, sometimes take this example of predicting an interest rate based on the users transactions, etc. Now that is that is kind of a tight place to walk, right? Because you can pay, we are charging you that interest and the model is learning that. Is that correct? Not correct? What is the ethics around it? What is the governance around it? What kind of decisions and what kind of decisions should AI make and what kind of decisions it should stay away from could be the next round of governance that the models and people in the company could be thinking in. For example, in marketplace kind of scenario where there are a bunch of vendors and there is a bunch of customers, the company has the advantage of pushing for one vendor over the other depending on ad revenues, etc. Now, what level of ethics does it touch, and where should AI play a role in this? These kind of questions, which is more on AI governance, I think would be the next bet. The third I could think of is AI's role in vernacularization, where today a bulk of transactions and everything is still happening in English, which actually native to very small percentage of the world population. So this will change. I think this will get more vernacularized. People are going to talk or train models not only in local languages but on local preferences, right? So the image data, for instance, a bulk of it could come from a certain part of the world today, but it's not localized treatment for that geography a business is operating in. I think it's going to go technology is lot of things going to go to the bottom of the pyramid, and AI is going to be an instrumental thing in making that adoption happen. At least these are three trends that I could think of.
Thanks for those insights, Matangi. Shama, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, we do have time, and I also have another question here on LinkedIn, Radhika, but you go ahead with yours first.
Okay, all right. No, I considering the audience who are in this call, in this session, I just wanted to understand from your point of view, any words of wisdom from you in terms of understanding how to become an industry-ready data science professional. Is there any tips?
Sure. See, data science has two words in it: data and science. So it's about algorithms, but it is also about understanding the intuition behind data, respecting data from that perspective. Look at data, understand, look at patterns, try to come up with your thinking of what the data is trying to tell you before you heavy load it with a lot of algorithms. That does not demean the importance of machine learning, understanding of your algorithm. So you need to understand how algorithms work, what goes inside that. Hence, tomorrow if you have to change a loss function, or tomorrow you need to understand why certain models are doing the way it is doing, and if you have a baseline to beat, what kind of things you should apply. You need to have that intuition, and that can come only by actually going deep into how your machine learning itself works. One way to also, if you have time and if you are at the beginning of the career, please do try to write the scratch code versions of some of these algorithms without using a library. That's one way to understand that better. That's just a tip. So data, understanding of algorithm, having empathy for business, and really applying this to business needs and business impact driven data science is very important to cultivate, right? So those would be my three things to develop for a budding data scientist.
Right.
Perfect. I will, it's a very good way to conclude the session as well, Radhika. Here, very interesting thoughts on that. So yes, go ahead, Radhika.
Is there any further question, Shama?
No, that's all right.
That's okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Radhika, for the wonderful questions.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the participants, and thanks to Shama. Thank you.
Thank you, Matangi, for the brilliant and engaging session. It's been a delight having you here and complete honor as well. So as a small token of appreciation, please accept the certificate of appreciation from the Institute.
Okay.
And if you scan the QR code on the certificate, it will take you to a recording of the session. And
Okay.
we'll upload the recording on the YouTube channel as well.
Sure. I do it right now. There is the...
Give us a few hours to upload it on YouTube and be able to access that.
Sure. Okay. Cool.
Thank you, Matangi, for joining us and sharing your invaluable journey and experiences with us. And I'm sure our audience has benefited a lot from this session. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Radhika, for moderating the session seamlessly. You were amazing as always.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Audience, if you found today's keynote useful, please take a few seconds to share your feedback, experience, and perspectives on the session and inspire others to join the subsequent sessions. Please scan the QR codes to share your feedback.